Welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Quality, the podcast. My name is Hemish, and since 2023, I've been interviewing some of the most talented and well-respected quality leaders in the pharma and biotech industry to learn how they got to where they are now. This season is all about our guests and their journeys. Why they got into science, how they got into quality, their biggest challenges and greatest learns, and the highs and lows along the way. Every week, I'll be bringing you a new guest with the purpose of inspiring the next generation of quality leaders. Welcome to Season 3. I hope you enjoy the show.
Hi all, welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk Quality, the podcast. Today I'm joined by Theresa Donegan. Theresa is the VP of Quality at Climb Bio, a startup biotech in Boston. Theresa spent the last decade or so building quality in a startup environment. So I really wanted to speak with her to learn exactly how to go about that team build, the building blocks that you need in place, what you need to prioritize, how to bring in consultants, when and where to bring in your full-time team members, how to manage upwards, some of the red flags and green flags to look out for when you're interviewing with companies at the startup space. So for anyone that's interested in learning about how to build quality in early phase biotechs in the startup space, this is a really good episode to listen to. Hope everyone enjoys the show. Let's get into it. Theresa, hi. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Joining us. My pleasure. Looking forward to getting into your journey, Theresa. I've given you a very quick introduction, but could you please give everyone a quick high-level overview of who you are, what you're doing right now, and then we'll get into it.
So I work for a company called Climb Bio. We work in immune-mediated diseases, and we are in the middle of clinical trials, multiple clinical trials, but we are a small startup. I have over 30 years of experience in industry, all of it in quality. I started out in a QC lab and kind of went through the GLPs, the GMPs, the GCPs, so I have a lot of experience in all of those realms, and that is kind of what has led me through my career, just sitting in different pieces and parts, and that was kind of how I rose through the ranks and became, a head of quality. So, lots of things there through my career. Lots of experiences, big companies, small companies, CROs, you name it. So
excellent, good stuff. Well, we're going to get into your journey. So let's start at the beginning, I suppose. Just very quickly tell the listeners how you initially got into science and how that transitioned into the wonderful world of quality.
Well, it's kind of a very twisty journey, right? So I originally started off, I was going to go to nursing school. I worked my way through college, in nursing homes and doctors' offices, and I was going to be a nurse, and then I didn't really like it. And so I pivoted to science, which I had always liked science. And, it was kind of an accident, to be perfectly honest. I was like, oh, what am I going to do now that I'm not going to nursing school? And wound up as a biochemistry major, did that, just always liked science, so did that. I couldn't decide between biology and chemistry, and I was like, oh, biochemistry, there we go. That seems like a good idea, right? Because when you're in college, you don't really know, right? So did that, came out of college, worked in a lab. So I was in a QC lab in a small, it wasn't really a startup. It was kind of an offshoot of a company that was doing laboratory testing. And so they have now become Charles River's BPS Malvern. So I, basically worked in a contract lab, did that for a couple of years, and then moved on to large pharma. And I went to SmithKline Beecham at the time. They were building their first monoclonal manufacturing plant, did that for a while. Fortunately, when we push things into the pipeline, we always have these grand schemes of what we're going to do. So they built an $82 million manufacturing plant. It was the first 50 liter in the US at the time, which was very cool to be part of that, and do the startup for the labs for that. Fortunately, our product went into phase 2B and patients went anaphylactic, and then there was no jobs there. They were going to sell that off to become a contract lab, and I didn't really want to go back to being contract. So I moved back into the, from a GMP environment to GLP. So I moved back in the research realm back there, and spent several years there before and that was in Pennsylvania. And then we moved to Massachusetts and went to work for Charles Rivers for many years while I was raising my children. And from there, it was, that was all GLP. And when I left there, I consulted for a while. And after I consulted, then I went to some other companies and I got into the GCP realm. So I've spent significant time in each one of those GXP realms. And that's kind of how my journey worked. And in there, I did go and get a degree in quality and regulatory, which my side of it was all really quality, which that was where I really learned, what the regulations are and what they mean. Because you go out of college and you work in a quality realm. They give you about 30 minutes of training and they go, here you are, you've trained and all you're done. So that was, didn't really know what I was doing at the time. It was right out of college. So I think my degree was really helpful in helping me, really navigate the regulations, learn why they're there, learn all about the preambles and, the interpretation and all of that. So that was a really important part of kind of my journey there. Because I think a lot of times we work in industry and, I was probably 10 years in before I truly read the regulations, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And they are,
Yeah, awesome. So we're going to talk a lot about startup quality, I suppose, because you've spent a lot of time, particularly in the last few years, in that startup world. And I think a lot of people have made that transition from big pharma into the smaller startup space. And it's an interesting space, completely different experience and mindset required compared to working in big pharma, would you say?
Absolutely. So I think there's a time and a place for big pharma, like in your career. There's a lot of things it gives you. But I do think you get to a point where it becomes, it's just very big and it's hard to get things done and you're very siloed. And so I made a conscious decision to leave big pharma and go to biotech. There's so much more risk in it, but there's also so much more reward. So that part is really interesting. Because I have spent so long in CROs, I'm used to a very fast-paced environment. So, that always leads me there as well, because startup is very fast-paced. And I always like to say it's like two sides of a coin, right? Like it's fast-paced and it's great for like being able to wear many hats and like really learn as you're going. It's also fast-paced and you're really learning while you're going, right? Like, so it's, it's good and bad. So, it is where I really kind of, this is where I want the rest of my career to go. This is, I think where you can have so much more impact. I do think when you're in a big company, it's hard to be tied to the patient. It's hard to be tied to the product because you're usually navigating so many products, right? And the patient seems so far away. But when you're in a small biotech, it's really not that. You know anything and everything about the product, right? And exactly tie up all the loose ends because what's going on all aspects of it. So, and that's what draws me really to startup. So it's very interesting from that perspective.
How do you cope with the energy? Does it give you energy? It must give you a bit of a thrill going into those environments, blank canvas to start with.
Yeah, it does. Because, I really like to build. And so when you get to build from the start, you don't have to build on what somebody else already started, right? So you get to build it your way from the get-go, which is really nice. And you don't always get to do it exactly the way you want because, to be honest, if you don't work with your partners to build what they need too, right? You can't just build what you want. You have to build what the company needs, right? So you really have to get alignment through the entire organization on what you need to move forward. And so that's a paramount when you kind of get started is what is your mission? What is your vision? What do you want the company to look like in 3 years or 5 years, And it's hard to think like that when you're like really in startup and you maybe have 10 people in the company, but you do have to do that, right? You've got to know where you're going or you're never going to get there. So
when in that exact environment, when you are in a small business, you might be a team of one in quality, and those relationships with your partners are extremely important. Could you give us an insight into what those first 30, 60, 90 days in your role look like? What does it, when you come in, you're a complete blank canvas, I suppose, what's the starting position and how do you move through those first 3 months?
Yeah, so I think it's actually very different now than it was pre-COVID, right? So pre-COVID, like everything was, you started up, it was all paper, right? And we all had to do this twist and turn through COVID where it's like, all right, well, we're not really going to be in the office. So we have to go to electronic systems. So now we at least have electronic systems to start with in terms of our QMS. Finding a nice little quality system that you can use. Like, I don't ever really want to go back to paper again. You know what I mean? It's like paper back in the day, we were like, oh, we'll start in paper because that helps us design where we want to go, right? But now there's enough systems out there and they're not that expensive that you can start from the get-go. So really the first couple of days is getting people on board with, what do you need for quality? And it kind of depends on where they bring you in, right? Like, they don't always bring you in on day one, right? So you might have a lot of product made or, things like that. So you're in the midst of trying to do all the work and then build too. So I often say we're flying the plane while we're building it, right? Yeah. So it really depends on what part, where they are in their development plan when they bring you in, because they don't always bring you in at the beginning. Right?
Yeah.
And so sometimes there's some cleanup there, right?
Yep.
You there's cleanup and then there's build, right? So, it really depends what it's going to be depending on where you kind of get dropped into the process. But irregardless, the first thing you're always doing is doing some kind of a gap analysis, right? Like, where are we? Where do we need to go? What departments do we have? What kind of resources do they have? Because I can't build something that they don't have people to resource either, right? In terms of a quality system. So, I can't build a change control program or a quality event program that's too burdensome for them if they don't have the people to manage it, right? So it's very much about, where is the company going? Where are we going to get there? Doing that gap analysis, showing them where their problem spots are and how to fix them. And then also, figuring out how we're going to move forward, and that depends on, what kind of company we are. Are we a fully virtual company? Are we external manufacturing? Do we have an internal manufacturing plant? Because there's so many permutations of what a startup can be that you have to tailor everything to that particular startup, right? And as much as we say like a startup is a startup, that's not really the case, right? Like they're very different.
Yeah. So, and in an ideal world, like obviously, the company should be bringing in quality as early as possible. What do you think is the optimum time to bring in a permanent head of quality? And I know it's not a linear answer.
I don't know that there's ever a perfect time, right?
Yeah.
Because I do think it depends on the company and the development timeline. And I think there are a lot of companies that got by with good consultants. The problem usually is, do you know what a good consultant is, right? Are you leveraging what you need to be leveraging? So I've been brought into companies before where they're like, oh, well, we're in really good shape. We have a GMP consultant. We have this consultant. Mm-hmm. And then you go in and you find out that all they did was go out and do audits of the vendors, right? Like and if we're in phase one, like we shouldn't be wasting our money going out and doing audits. Like there's other ways to qualify our vendors in phase one, right? So you can start your full-time people later, and most companies do, but you should have some really good consultants with you. And to be honest, as I build, I start with consultants anyway. People don't necessarily always believe this, and there are many of us out there who have a dual skill set, right? So we cross the GXPs, but there's a lot of us out there who don't, who are just GMP people or just GCP people. And GCP people don't really know what GMP people do, right? Like, you really have to have, you get this all the time when you start looking, why can't you just hire one person who does everything? And that's not how our skill sets are laid out. It's no different. You wouldn't ask a CMC person that, right? Because their skill sets are all different. An MSAT person is different than a manufacturing on the floor person, right? And quality is the same way. We all have different skill sets. And so you have to hire for the skill sets that you need, which is why I always end up having to start with consultants anyway, because you don't have the need for somebody full-time unless you know that unicorn out there. And there are some of them, but there are not a lot of unicorns, right? Like people tend to stay with what they like. If you really want structure, you're probably a GMP person, right? If you really like a little bit of loosey-goosey and you like the clinic, then you're a GCP person, right? If you're into the tox world, then you're probably a GLP person, right?
Yeah. So for someone like you, then you've got, a fairly broad background across GXP.
Mm-hmm.
Where would, for you coming into your role, how would you prioritize the consultant gaps, or I suppose that where you need to plug people in or plug skill sets in? Do you look at the company stage, you look at your skill set and just build from there? Is there a playbook around it?
So I look at the company stage, right? So it all depends on where we are and what their development plan is. How many clinical trials are they going to do? Are they in phase 1? Are they, sometimes we acquire assets and we're already in phase 2, right? So we don't have that GMP guideline that gives us kind of that little bit of a get out of jail free card, right? So it depends on where you are and what your skill sets are. So like I just, I've been with Climb for a little while. I was actually lucky enough to consult with them for a while back in the day. So, I do know where everything is. So it's easy for me to slot those things in, but they're external manufacturing. So you're going to need a GMP person, right? I have a GCP consultant that I just brought in because we're heading in phase 2, right?
Yeah.
If you're doing external manufacturing, you need somebody to oversee your testing. So I have a QC person, right? So we've slotted them in because someone has to manage the stability programs because we need to be able to extend the expiry on all of our drug product, right? So you're going to need that. So it really depends on, what you're doing. If you're internal manufacturing, then you're going to have a whole different set of skill sets. And then you're probably going to hire more full-time people, right? Because you can justify more full-time people. So again, it depends on what your company looks like.
Yeah. What do you think good looks like then in that early stage role that you're in? I suppose it's like you can easily over-engineer things, I guess.
You can, and you have to be really careful with that. And so, that was really to my point of you have to work with your organization to figure out where they're going. What does the development timeline look like? And the thing that's always tough about that is usually things aren't super planned out and you're running, like everybody is running. And then next thing you know, they're like, oh, we're gonna buy a new molecule. We're going to start a new trial. We're going to go into China. We're going to do this. You know what I mean? Like there's a million things going. So a lot of times you're just reacting, but at some point you kind of have to draw that line in the sand and go, okay, guys, now we all need to align, and have kind of a summit and say, here's where we're going, because I can't plan for my organization if you don't plan for your organization, right? As the rest of the company. So like I say to my CMC people, like, I need to know how many lots you're making. I need to know how many, what supply looks like. I need to know when your next tech transfer is going to happen, or if you're going to go from one process to the next process because you want to make process improvements, right? If you're in the clinic, then I need to know, are we US? Are we ex-US? Do we need a QP? Like, do I need a QP consultant too, right? So I can release in the EU or in the UK, right? Or am I in other countries that aren't even part of the EU and the UK, right? How many clinical trials are we have going? How many sites are we going to have going? What phase are we in? Like, I need all of that information so that I can figure out what I need to support the organization. Sometimes, you just have to get everybody in a room and say, you have to lay it out. And the thing that's tough with that sometimes is you have people who are really good at like one thing, but they're not necessarily good at the other thing. So then you kind of really have to sit and literally on a whiteboard, you're kind of sitting there going, all right, here's the CMC plan. This has to happen. This gates this gates that, and you're actually working it out on a board so that everybody can come to an alignment on what needs to happen, when it needs to happen, because you got to work backwards from that, right? And then that's how you're going to know when you need people and, when you need to do audits and, how much you have to build the quality system, right?
Yeah. There's so many things that go into it that you have to think about in those early days, which is obviously very much dependent on the company, the people that you've got in the business, the stage of development.
Yeah. I mean, you thank God for your really good partners who have done this before, right? But not everybody in startup has done it before. Like you kind of, sometimes you have to bring them along too, right? So with the benefit of your own experience. So.
What are the hardest things? What are the biggest challenges that you're facing or that typically you would face in this world right now?
I think resourcing is tough trying to figure out what resourcing you need in, because it depends on where you are in your runway, right? Everybody has a different runway. You only get X amount of the budget. You need to save as much budget as you can for clinical trials, because those are going to be super expensive. If you can't get your drug into patient to give them some hope, particularly like if you're in an oncology field, right? Then, my building the best quality system isn't helpful to anybody at that point if if we can't dose patients with something that we think is going to be beneficial to them, right? So resourcing is always really tricky depending on where what your runway is, where your next inflection point is, depending on your money. And honestly, a lot of that leads back to your leadership team. It comes back to how good is your leadership team. Yeah. And so in a startup, you're not just picking an organization. You truly need to figure out, do you have a good leadership team and do you fit with that leadership team?
Yeah.
And honestly, if you're not comfortable there and you don't fit, you're not the right fit for them and they're not the right fit for you, then you shouldn't actually be in that organization. And that's my personal opinion. And times are tough right now. So that's, nobody really wants to hear that, but that's not going to help anybody in the long run. I've literally kind of done this before where I was like, we don't all mesh, right? This doesn't work. It's not going to take us to the next step. So sometimes you do end up having to, walk away when something isn't the right fit too, which is kind of hard to do.
Definitely, yeah, especially in a tough market. But well, let's just talk about that for a second, because I think it's a really good point. When you are talking to a company, interviewing, whatever, it's really, especially in a challenging market, like you say, when job levels are down. But how do you balance that in that sort of feeling of, right, this is a job that I can do, or this is an opportunity for me to make a living, versus actually this is not, I'm getting red flags here that I'm picking up through the process by talking to people in the business, to like learning about the culture. How do you go about spotting those red flags, and what are some of those?
I think those are really hard to spot, but I don't think there's anything that's, you're specifically looking for, but you feel it, right? So you'll feel it in interviews. I know I went into one interview at one point and they were like, I hate when they ask for my opinion and they want my opinion. I give them my opinion, but they didn't really want my opinion, right?
Yeah.
That's always a red flag, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes you just don't know, right? Like a lot of times, when you're basing your, should I take the job or should I not take the job? You're looking at the organization, you're looking at the product, you're looking at the runway, you're looking like, these are all the things that you need to look at when you're in a startup, and people who haven't been in a startup wouldn't necessarily know that. And a lot of times in the startup is they don't tell you a lot about what your runway is. They hold that kind of close, right? So you might think that our funding is coming next month, right? Like, so you'll hear those kind of things, right? So you don't always know.
Yeah.
But, sometimes you'll get in there and you'll be like, oh, okay, here's all the things I didn't know, because to be honest, it doesn't matter. You never know everything until you sign the paper and you get in there, right?
Of course.
So you can try to check as much as you want. I usually go back to the people who are on that leadership team and have they been successful in a startup before? Because I always think that's a good way to look at it. So if they've been successful before, they'll probably be successful again. That doesn't necessarily come out either, right? Yeah.
Well, that's what I was going to ask is, like, on the contrary to those green flags, what are those positive signs, green flags that you can spot that actually gives you a good feeling about it?
Yeah. So I think runway, for anybody, runway is a big deal, right? Like, you want to be able to have like some understanding of runway, because if you have 2 years of runway, you have a job for 2 years. And if that's when your next inflection point is, and then you feel like your leadership team is really good. The other thing you can do is you can kind of see it. You can see how much your leadership team is out and about and talking with investors and, out there giving talks and within, the realm of what it is your product is, right? So if you have a really good leadership team, they're going to be out there having those talks. They're going to be publicizing what you do, even if you're not ready to do a cash raise, right? So I think that is
Yeah.
something that you can look at. If they're not out doing any of that and you don't really see it, then you can kind of be like, And sometimes there's other things you're worried about, right? Like maybe you're the CEO and I'm not worried about this yet because it's 2 years off or something like that, right? And we have other things we need to worry about right now. But those are just kind of some of the things that I look at when I...
Yeah, and that's good. And often, you might not be able to see that as strongly until you're into the company, but you could, these are good questions that you can ask during the interview process to the leadership team around how proactive they are being around investment or getting out there and getting the company name out there. So I think that's good.
Yeah, and I think from an interviewing perspective, when you're interviewing the rest of the team, like not necessarily the leadership team, you do want to ask them questions about transparency, right? How transparent are they with the people who work there already? And you can get a little bit of feel for that too. I personally like a really transparent, I want to know what's going on, right? Like, And if, from a quality perspective, we don't know what's going on once we hit inside the company, right? Then we can't navigate anything if we don't know, if people don't tell us or they hold information close to their vest, right? Like, so you do have to, you have to know that who you're working with is going to be transparent and they're going to work with you. So that's another way you can kind of, look at that and figure it out too.
And a lot of it is once you're in there, it's managing upwards and working closely with your leadership team and people you're reporting into, whether that's a CEO or whoever. And one of the challenges, as you say, is striking that balance between speed and compliance, pragmatism versus compliance. Do you have any sort of advice around how best to manage that balance, speed versus risk?
So I think in speed versus risk, it's very much, this is funny because I've been around for 30 years and we didn't really do risk management back in the day, right? Like it's relatively new. I know I'm saying like 15 years, but we didn't do it back in the day. Every problem was a big problem. Like there was no small problems, right? But now we have tools that we can risk assess and go, yeah, maybe I don't need to worry about this, or I can push this down the line, or we don't really need this. Again, that's all you do that along with your development timeline, right?
Yeah.
And you push what you can push to the point where you need it. So a lot of the things that you do in quality in a startup are just, you're planning for just in time. You're never there early, right? It's a just in time thing, or it might be a little bit behind the time, right?
Yeah.
Because that's just kind of the way it all works out for you.
Yeah.
You do have to plan for that. So.
Yeah.
And then I think from a quality perspective, so one of the first things I do is, try to come in and build the quality mission and vision. And it's like the airport. I just tell people, if you see something, say something, right? Because I'm one person. My consultants are not necessarily on site. If you don't tell them, they don't know. So really it becomes everyone is responsible for quality. And so, you have to come to me. And so from my perspective, then I need to be like very approachable, right? If I'm not approachable, nobody's going to tell me anything. And that doesn't work either. So you just have to be very open, very honest, very transparent with your entire staff. And then when it comes to your leadership team, just indicating what the risks are, how you're going to mitigate the risk, how you're going to grow the organization, what your, getting the alignment for what your future state looks like. Those are all really important pieces. And if you don't lay that groundwork when you first come in, then you're not going to get there because you won't have gained that alignment and you don't have the trust of the other people that you're working with. You can't do it alone in a startup.
No.
Quality isn't just, it's not just my job, right? It's everybody's job.
But being able to do that well requires soft skills and requires the ability to build trust, which doesn't come naturally to people. And so for people that are early in their quality career and maybe want to become a head of quality one day, and they might lack some of the leadership traits. They might not have managed people. They might not have developed people. They might not have been through that journey yet and experience. What are the softer skills should they be working on right now that when they get to that position,
so I think
they're there?
Communicating is everything, right? And it's not what you say, it's how you say, right? It's how you say it. So that's a big piece of it. Reading people's nonverbals, Sitting and actually having discussions with people and understanding their point of view. Those are the kind of things that you want to do and develop in your soft skills and have, empathy for the other side. It's not just, I will say many years ago, I was like, the quality is the most important thing. And you get to a startup and you're like, oh, yeah, like if we don't have money, then we don't have quality. So that's how that works, right? So you really have to leverage those types of things. I'm not saying don't build your technical skills, because you should build your technical skills. But my general feeling when I hire in somebody is I can teach you anything you need to know from a technical standpoint.
Yeah.
I can try to coach you in those soft skills that you need, but you need to work on them. Like I can work on them with you, but I can't if you are very reactionary or you don't want to see somebody else's point of view or things like that. I can't help you fix that. I can coach you, but if you don't want to fix it, then you're not going to be a team player. And there's some cardinal rules, like come in, do your job, but you got to be a team player. And if you're not a team player, then the organization isn't going to embrace you. You're not going to get the quality culture that you want, and it's going to be very difficult to build. So, those are to me, those are the big things. You really have to work on your communication. And the other thing is, I can walk into a conversation about a compliance issue and I can tell you 10 different ways to fix it, right? But if you're not on board with those ways, then that's not going to work. So you have to work with that person and find the solution that they're going to be happy with too, because there's many ways to be compliant. And so I will say, like, when I was much younger, it took me a long time to really learn that. Like, if you don't include them in the solution, then they're not going to want the solution that you offer them, right?
You mean including your counterparts?
Yeah.
In the solution.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Yeah, I think when you get to the level of whether it's manager, senior, director level, the technical ability should, it should be there or thereabouts, and you can pick things up from your leaders, on that front. But I think the hardest and the biggest gap challenge for building teams is that those softer skills, those communication piece, the reading body language, the collaboration, being able to talk the language of other stakeholders in the business. And I think if people can't really put themselves out of their comfort zone and develop those skills earlier in their career, it really, I've seen people that have been in quality for years and years that haven't progressed to the top level because they lack those skills. So yeah, I agree. So I've enjoyed this, Theresa, some really good practical insights. I want to ask you just something about, to cap off the startup building sort of thing. So in your position now, I suppose, from someone who's got a good GXP background coming into the VP of quality, head of quality role, startup, utilize consultants, but then you're ready to kick on and build a full, a permanent team. If you had, a blank check, budget, which would be a nice thing to have, which nobody ever has, especially in quality. But if you did, let's say, what would be your first three priorities from a sort of a building perspective?
So you do need somebody who manages your quality system, right? Your person who's your doc control, your training, all of that, and who really takes that system and owns it, right? So you do need that. And if you only have three, so you told me a three, right? You need a GMP quality person. You're gonna have to release batches. You have to know that you have product quality around those, right? And then you need someone around your clinical trials as well. Those are the three big areas. Typically, most of your non-GLP stuff or your GLP is outsourced anyway, so that's just a bit of oversight.
Yeah.
But those three positions, if you build them, then you can utilize outside resources. So, my GCP quality person can manage all my clinical trials, my readiness, because we usually bring them on about when we go into our phase 3 pivotal trial, so that they're there for all of that. And then they get us ready for our first PAI, right? So you want that person, you just have to bring them in at the right time, right? So that is a key hire, or you're not going to pass your PAI, right? Somebody who does the quality system, and then there's your external manufacturing oversight GMP person as well. So those are the three that I feel like you have to have. If you can get some combined skill sets in there, that's great too. But
what do you mean by combined skill sets?
So, a lot of your GMP quality people might come out of a QC lab, so they might actually have the QC background that you're kind of looking for to just look at your stability programs and things like that, right? You don't get a whole lot of overlap that way. You might find a quality systems person who came from the GMP environment. That might be some overlap where you can utilize that in a way. It just kind of depends on where you are.
Yeah.
Even in a smaller startup that's external, those are the 3 full-time hires you're going to need for sure.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Very good. Right, we're going to finish on some quick fire questions.
Okay.
Theresa. So, and look, feel free to you may have sort of discussed some of this as we go, but let's start with your advice. So, what's the best piece of advice that you've ever received in your career?
Don't sweat the small stuff, and that includes the compliance issues. Everything is not, the sky is not falling. It's just not. So, just bring it down a notch. We'll figure out how to fix it. It's not falling. You're good. Because when you're a little younger in your career, that is what you think all the time, right? But it's not. And it takes you kind of a while to figure out that the sky really isn't falling. It's not that big a deal, right? It's a problem. Yes, we'll fix it and we'll move on to the next thing, right?
Yeah. What are the most important values that guide how you lead?
I think it's about treating people the way you want to be treated. So, respect, communication, setting expectations. I've had a lot of people that I've reported to. Some were really great, and I've, learned a lot from the really great ones for sure. I've also had some that weren't so good, and you learn just as much from them. Maybe it's all the things you don't want to do or you don't want to happen to you, but I do think, you learn from everybody. And so I think that that's like an important takeaway too.
What one piece of advice would you give to anyone early in their quality career who wants to lead one day?
Don't be afraid to take a leap of faith, because you're probably not going to think you're ready for it. Most of the time, you don't think you're ready for it.
Final question. Who has been the biggest inspiration to you in your life? And this could be either personally or professionally.
There's so many. There are just so many. I think my parents are big inspiration. They did not, they didn't go to, my mom didn't go to college. She didn't even go to work until after I was like 20, for God's sake, right? So went out, did her own thing, has done phenomenally. And I owe them a lot. My husband's been super supportive. So he is quite the inspiration as well. Very smart guy. And supports me 100%. And so that's always nice to have.
Theresa, I really enjoyed this conversation. I think there's really good practical advice, and you've done some amazing things, and it's such an exciting space, the startup space. So I think a lot of people would be quite inspired by your journey and how you've navigated it, and excited to see all the work that you guys are doing at Climb Bio, and hopefully making some great progress. We'll have to have you on in the future as well to see see where you're at.
Yeah, we're doing.
We'll do a part 2, but thank you so much for your time. If anyone would like to reach out, is LinkedIn generally the best way to do that?
Yeah, LinkedIn works.
Thanks so much, Theresa.
Thank you, Hemish. Thanks for having me on. I enjoyed it.
Pleasure.
Thank you for listening to today's show. I hope that you got value from it, whether you're starting your career in quality or if you're at the top of your field. Today's episode was brought to you by RX Group. I'm the founder of RX Group. We are a pharma and biotech recruitment organization focusing purely on quality assurance. We recruit consultants and senior level permanent quality professionals into the pharma and biotech industry. If we can support you, whether that be in a hiring capacity or if you yourself are looking for work, please get in touch with me on LinkedIn, visit our LinkedIn page where you can subscribe to the podcast, and visit our website, www.rx-group.io, to find out more about us. See you soon.